A horrifying and sad period in human history is the transatlantic slave trade. An estimated 2.5 million Africans were forcibly uprooted from their homes between 1525 and 1866 and sent halfway around the globe to live in the New World as slaves, where they were subjected to cruelty and abuse. However, 1 in 5 of them passed away even before they arrived in the New World as a result of the appalling conditions on board the ships that carried them over the ocean. The tragedy of the transatlantic slave trade is too complex to be covered in a single video. Consequently, today we're going to take a look at life on one of these slave ships and the horrible realities of what defenseless African people had to go through as a result of the slave trade. The pre-sales. The design of slave ships evolved over the course of the slave trade's hundreds of years as technology developed, but today's common conception of a slave ship is one of the large cargo ships known as Guinea men, so named because of the forced slavery and human trafficking which occurred along the Guinea coast of West Africa. Hundreds of slaves would be crammed onto these ships to travel across the ocean to the Americas in appalling conditions. The seized Africans would be stripped of their clothes and have their heads shaved before being pushed upon a deck to dwell in makeshift wooden huts until the crew was ready to set sail, but that was only the beginning of the ordeal. After gathering hundreds of Africans to sell, they were prepared to leave on their journey. To withstand a journey that many would not survive, they had confined their hostages below deck. Though there were also women and children on the ships, men made up around 2/3 of the captured slave population on average. They were unchained, kept apart from the males above deck, and kept from being raped by crew members. As a result of the brutality they endured on board the ships, some female slaves even traveled to the New World pregnant. The suffering endured by the men was varied but horrifying. They were crammed into small areas below deck that were frequently barely bigger than their bodies in their hundreds. The smallest of these claustrophobic compartments or shelves would be barely 10 inches high, and the highest would still be below 5 feet. They would be far too small for a fully grown man to be able to move or even sit up. The men had to lie end to end in these dark, cramped cells, chained to their fellow prisoners at all times, and remain in this position for the duration of the journey, which could be weeks or months. They were allowed to exercise and be hosed down on the deck for 1 hour each day in a feeble attempt at sanitation. However, the crew was not being sympathetic. Rather, the jailer was making sure that their prisoner would survive the voyage. One of the main causes of death on the slave ships was sickness. The males who were squatting in such small areas lacked access to restrooms or other sanitation facilities. They had no way to clean themselves if they puked, which was a common symptom of seasickness, and had to relieve themselves where they were and lay for hours in their feces and urine if they needed the bathroom. As a result, infections spread like wildfire on slave ships. Diseases like dysentery, smallpox, malaria, yellow fever, influenza, and measles frequently broke out. It's hardly surprising that so many people perished as a result of these terrible circumstances, and those who did survive were weak and ill, receiving little nourishment to assist them to gain strength. The slaves on board the ships were lucky to have 2 meals a day, and only after making sure there was enough food for the crew would they get the bare minimum to survive: small quantities of rice and beans with chicken, along with a liter of water. Freedom efforts. People today find it exceedingly difficult to fathom the suffering that the African people went through. Many of the captives attempted to end their lives by leaping overboard or starving themselves as a result of the physical and psychological abuse they were subjected to. However, their captors forbade them from doing so because a lost slave meant a lost paycheck for the captain. Slaves who attempted to starve themselves were restrained and forced to eat by having their mouths propped open with a device known as speculum aurum. Many attempts at suicide or other apparent infractions were severely punished. Thumbscrews and the cat of 9 tails, a multi-tailed whip designed to cruelly lacerate the victim's skin and inflict the greatest amount of pain possible, were 2 popular forms of torture. Some sailors even applied sea salt to the wounds of the most rebellious slaves, inflicting excruciating pain. Even the strongest slaves were weakened by disease, starvation, and dehydration, making it unlikely that they would attempt a revolt. Speaking of revolts, they were frequently organized by the women on slave ships because their position above deck gave them freedom of movement that the men didn't have. Sadly, they frequently failed, and the ringleaders suffered severe penalties. But occasionally a rebellion was successful, and some Africans were able to flee the life of slavery that was waiting for them in the new land. The ship La Amistad was the site of the most well-known insurrection ever. As the transatlantic slave trade came to an end in 1839, slaves aboard the La Amistad rebelled, and 53 African slaves took control of the ship, killing the cook and the captain, but sparing the navigator's life so he could guide them home. However, in an unexpected turn of events, the navigator led them north until the rebel ship was captured by the US Navy. However, the United States court ultimately decided that the slaves did not deserve to have been captured. Although the transatlantic slave trade lasted for 3 centuries, too many Africans were helpless in the face of the ships that abducted them, and for those who survived the horrifying voyage over the Atlantic, what awaited them once they arrived at the port was no better. Many of the people who were sold into servitude by cruel and tortured white people after being taken from their families wished their trip had ended on the ships that transported them to their new nightmare. Documented brutality. Over 36,000 trips carrying slaves across the Atlantic Ocean are recorded in the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database. When you choose an entry in the register, a list of startlingly accurate details will appear, including the size of the ship, the name of the captain, the number of people who were initially aboard the ship when it departed from Africa, as well as the number of people who perished during the Middle Passage. It serves as a chilling illustration of the institutionalized violence of the slave trade. In a 2018 introduction to the database, Emory University historian David Eltis stated that the shipment of enslaved Africans over the Atlantic was morally indistinguishable from shipping textiles, wheat, or even sugar, for those Europeans who gave the subject some attention. Even though these documents are incredibly dense and meticulously documented, very little information on daily life on these ships or the experience of being on board has survived. But that's what sets out the Journal of the Slave Ship Mary, which Georgetown University Library in Washington, D.C. just acquired. It is one of only a dozen or so known logbooks or dated notebooks with daily entries that survived during slave ship travels between Africa and North America. It was written by an unnamed aide of the ship's captain, Nathan Sterry. For instance, it was previously known that the ship sailed from Providence, Rhode Island in late 1795 and that it reached Savannah, Georgia via Senegal, Liberia, and Ghana in August of 1796. The logbook provides details on daily events that are not included in the administrative records of the majority of journeys. Although the journal is written from a white, powerful perspective, it is impossible to hide Mary's everyday horrors. The logbook is described as a record of death and dying in a film that goes along with the text by Adam Rothman, an historian at Georgetown and keeper of the university's slavery archive. According to him, slaves perished aboard the ship nearly every day, and their corpses were tossed overboard. The keeper of the logbook, however, did not note the names of the deceased or any other identifying details. According to a journal entry from July 20, 1796, buried one woman, N26. Only a number is used to identify each slave who perished on the ship. Over the course of the journey, 38 people died in all. The causes can be anything from sickness to fatal beatings to suicide. According to Herbert Brewer, an historian of slavery at Morgan State University in Maryland, we have a lot of evidence from the slave trade, but we also don't have a lot of stuff. If you give it some thought, the biggest thing lacking is the identities of the individuals. We don't know the names of the people, and that's a huge problem. And these are individuals. The Georgetown Slavery Archive, which was established as part of the university's larger initiative to look into its historical relationship with slavery, included a study of the slave ship Margaret that Brewer participated in. A failed uprising caused 4 of Mary's casualties. Before Mary departed for Georgia from Africa on June 10, 1796, several slaves were able to break free of their chains and make an attempt to seize control of the ship. The logbook's author details the conflict and deaths that followed in a full-page description. 2 of the guys, in his version, leapt overboard, while the other 2 perished in the altercation with the crew. The author ends the day's note simply by writing, "The weather ends lovely." That's it for today's video. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment on what video you want to watch next. And if you found this video interesting, make sure to watch this video to learn more about Roman slaves' lives.